Hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Megan McLaurin, and I'm the programming coordinator at Interaccess, which organizes Vector Festival each summer. Interaccess is a gallery and production studio based in Toronto, dedicated to supporting emerging and experimental practices in new media art. I will begin by saying that at Interaccess, we oppose the violence and injustice facing Black and Indigenous communities, and we stand in solidarity in the fight against white supremacy, systemic racism, and colonialism, and urge our community to recognize and stand up against systemic and individual acts of racism. I'd also like to acknowledge that the land on which Interaccess operates has been the site of human activity for more than 15,000 years. It is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat, and is now home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. We acknowledge this treaty, and we remain critical of the ways it's largely been breached by settlers and newcomers. At Interaccess, we commit to the work of renewed Indigenous sovereignty. In light of this being an online event, I know a lot of you will be joining from places outside Toronto, and I invite you to learn more about the territories and treaties and languages across and beyond Turtle Island at native-land.ca. And today we are excited to be presenting Accessibility in Game Art, a panel discussion presented as part of Vector Festival 2021. This event is presented in partnership with OCADU's Inclusive Design Research Center and Hand-Eye Society, and I'll tell you a little bit about both of those great organizations. The Inclusive Design Research Center at OCAD University supports an open community of designers, developers, and researchers and activists who work together to proactively ensure that emerging technology and practices are designed inclusively. Throughout its 28-year history, the IDRC has partnered with artists and cultural workers to explore how inclusive technology can support creative expression and greater access to cultural communities. Founded in 2009, the Hand-Eye Society is a Toronto not-for-profit dedicated to supporting and showcasing video games made primarily as a form of creative expression. Hand-Eye Society aims to provide exhibition opportunities, education, creative support, mentorship, knowledge sharing, and inspiration to artists, enthusiasts, and the game curious in Toronto. Now I would like to welcome our panelists, Tiffany Witcher, Steve Saylor, and our moderator, Sandra Danilovic. Before handing things over to Sandra, I'd like to introduce her to you all. Sandra Danilovic is an assistant professor in game design and development at Wilfrid Laurier University. She researches game design for mental health and inclusion. She organizes game jams for research purposes and draws on arts-based and participatory methods to collaborate with marginalized and underserved communities. Currently, she's the lead researcher on a Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council grant exploring autobiographical game design as a sense-making tool for youth living with opioid addiction. She's also the lead designer of an educational mobile app for the Laurier Career Center. Prior to entering academia, she's also an award-winning documentary filmmaker and multimedia artist. So welcome, Sandra. We're so happy to have you here today, and take it away.
Thank you so much, Megan. It's a real pleasure to be here. I just want to give a brief visual description of who I am. I'm Sandra Danilovic. I'm a white woman with brown hair, braided hair, and cat's eye glasses. I'm in my home office, and my background is my living room, and my pronouns are she, her. Thank you so much, and I would like to introduce our two wonderful guests that are part of this panel. Steve Saylor is a blind video gamer with a passion for creating great content and consulting with developers to improve accessibility for disabled users. Steve has been creating digital content professionally for over 14 years, from podcasts to YouTube videos to social media campaigns. He is well versed in how to produce content for the web. He brings a wide variety of creativity to any project, has elevated and executed concepts to a professional quality, leaving clients more than satisfied with the results. Steve, welcome. Could you briefly describe yourself for all of us?
Yeah, sure. And thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Sandra. I appreciate that. Yes, hi, I'm Steve Saylor. I'm a white male with very fair blonde hair. I have black dark rimmed glasses, currently wearing a black and gray checkered shirt. And I'm sitting in my home office with a bunch of gaming and sort of pop culture knickknacks and behind me on shelves. And I also have a 4 foot tall statue of Leonardo from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And he has a bunch of lanyards hanging around his neck. I like to nickname him Leonardo. And that's basically me.
Thank you, Steve. And now I'm going to introduce Tiffany Witcher, known as the Charity Witch on Twitch. Tiffany Witcher is a virtual streamer, voice actor, and an advocate for accessibility and chronic illnesses in gaming. They have made it their goal to raise money for different causes and charities. Tiffany has personally worked and organized charity events with organizations such as the Lupus Foundation and Epilepsy Foundation. This is in honor of their mother, Myra Witcher, who sadly passed away due to lupus on April 11th, 2017. Tiffany has voiced in over 24 indie video games and is now engaging in motion capture acting. They have hosted events on Twitch and at conventions and have participated in roundtable discussion with topics from disabilities and accessibility in games to persons of color issues in gaming. Tiffany has personally worked with Twitch with disability needs and improving charities. They have also appeared in articles and videos from the Washington Post to Wired magazine, recognizing their varied career thus far. Tiffany, welcome to this presentation.
Hello, good time zone to you. Hello, everyone. My name is Tiffany Witcher. Yes, I am known as the Charity Witch on Twitch. I'm a virtual reality character, mainly a caster of spells, as you would like to say. Brown of skin, big black rimmed glasses. I'm wearing a dark outfit with very, very pointed ears and long flowing black hair. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. So, okay, I'm wondering if we can just kind of jumpstart this conversation on accessibility in game art and just hammer out some of the basics for our audience in terms of how do we define inclusive design, inclusion, and accessibility. And I'm thinking, what is, for example, what is inclusive design and what does that mean to you? Steve, can I start with you? What is inclusive design? How do we define accessibility, for example? Can you share some insights on that front?
Sure. Yeah. Inclusive design to me essentially is not only just kind of limited to just people with disabilities, but essentially is inclusive to all players, regardless of kind of not only just ability, background, or even sexual orientation, or sexual preference. Essentially, to me, I see like when everyone can be able to play a game, like even from a mobile game on your phone to playing on the latest console or high-end PC gaming, essentially when you can design a game around that with in regards to like representation and also accessibility options in a game, that's when inclusive design kind of like is a part of that. And how you kind of go about it essentially, or kind of a little more about sort of accessibility and adding that in there. Essentially what it, like, even though yes, accessibility in the context even from this panel is that we are talking about generally players with disabilities, but we're also talking about and like just like from a different wide perspectives of disabilities, because there are sort of three different types of accessibility. There's permanent disability, there's situational disability, and there's also temporary disability. Permanent disability generally means that anything, like if you have something that's either from a disability from birth or an incident that's happened in your life, that essentially you will have a permanent disability for the rest of your life. Those are those particular players. And then there's also temporary, which means either say you break your arm or your fingers or your hands, or you're temporarily blind. Essentially, those are kind of like essentially at a certain point that disability will go away, but you still need accessibility options. And then there's also situational. So kind of put as an example, if you have if you're a new parent and you have a baby and you want to be able to play some games, but you can't because you just put the baby down after spending 2 to 3 hours trying to be able to put that baby down. And it's like, I just want to be able to play a game and not disturb. So it's that's where accessibility can come in. So I like the way that Microsoft likes to say when it comes to like to talk about when describing accessibility and inclusivity, is that when everyone plays, we all win. And I include people with disabilities. I include people of color. I include people of from the LGBTQIA community. Like all of that. Whenever we have the chance to be able to play together and play and have equal access to a game, that's when accessibility kind of and inclusive design does its best work.
Thanks so much, Steve. Tiffany, over to you. What does inclusive design and accessibility, what do those two concepts or ideas mean to you in particular?
Steve hit it right on the head with everything. He just hit every point. Like, no, it's okay. It's fully okay. No, it means that making games that are accessible for all, that everyone can play and enjoy, whether it's for me, I'm a parent and I love to play games with my son at times, and like playing Smash Brothers with him, it would be making those controls accessible not only for me, for my disabilities that I have, but that he can also enjoy with his mother. And there's no dynamic in, different play skills because of that. Making it so that you can play with your friends, have fun, and then make it enjoyable. You want these things to have, and so no one is absolutely left out. And that's like the worst thing that can happen, is that you have these wonderful games out here and that someone feels left out because it's not accessible to them, and they see all their friends and family having fun with it, and that's not fair at all. So yes, making accessibility equal to everyone, whether it being age, race, sexual background, gender, it doesn't matter. It should be equal for absolutely everyone.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. So, I thought I would ask this panel to also, because we're in right now, we're defining these terms so that they're clear for the audience. I thought that maybe we could kind of try our hand at defining what is a game, because after all, we're talking about games, and I know that we all have assumptions about what a game is, and society as a whole has a variety of assumptions about what means to play a game. And so I thought I would ask that question, and prior to just sort of putting that question out there, what is a game? What is a game to you, Tiffany, and what is a game to you, Steve? I thought I would I would like to single out this quote from Anna Anthropy, who is, I don't know if everyone's aware of Anna Anthropy. She's an American game designer, trans game designer and artist, who has, catapulted, indie games to the forefront, and has written a book called Rise of the Video Game Zinsters: How Freaks, normals, amateurs, artists, dreamers, dropouts, queers, housewives, and people like you are taking back an art form. And in this book, which is quite wonderful actually, she defines a game and she says, well, what to make a game about? Your dog, your child, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your mother, your father, your grandmother, your friends, your imaginary friends, your first job, your worst job, your first date, your first kiss, your first fuck, your first true love, a silent moment at a pond, a noisy moment in the heart of a city, a slow moment, a long moment, the cruelty of children, the brashness of youth, the wisdom of age, the stupidity of age, anything, everything. I've condensed that quote because she actually lists a lot more in that paragraph about what basically we can make games about. But I'm wondering if we can use that quote as a kind of inspiration to talk about how we think of games in society and how in terms of inclusion and accessibility. Who wants to start? Tiffany?
Sure. I think of games as an experience. Just like you said with all the examples, it's an experience that you dive into and that you want to see, whether it being a storyline or playing with friends. Every game that you're going to play is going to be an experience, in my opinion. And I think that's the main things that makes up a video game. For me, I love story-driven games. I love diving deep. I love connecting to characters, whether they live, they die. I cry. When I cry, I know it's a good game. When I feel that emotion of that character, I know it's a good thing. I love the shock. I love the happiness, the sadness. It's an experience for me. And it's one of those things that with inclusion and accessibility, seeing characters like yourself really drives that experience much more. I forget the name of the video game, but there was a character with lupus, and I suffer from lupus. And it was like, whoa, there's a character with lupus in here, and you have to go get her medicine. And I was just like, oh man, because that's how it is. We have to take medication every day, and we have to always make sure we're on top of our health because lupus can strike anytime. It's that connection that you feel with yourself and getting that from these characters. When I see a black lead woman, it just draws me more in because I was like, oh, she looks like me. So it's one of those things where I find video game an experience, and that's what I believe video gaming is about.
Such an important point, Tiffany. Thank you, Steve.
Same with gonna echo a lot of what Tiffany said. She said it really, really well. Essentially for me, the way I sort of see a game is that it's an escape. It allows me to kind of it's same with like any type of entertainment, whether that's movies, TV shows, comics, books, whatever. Gaming is kind of part of that. It allows me to sort of feel like that I can sort of disconnect from the world. I mean, especially with this past year, like we've all kind of felt like, hey, like we would just love to just kind of disconnect from everything and just kind of escape for a little bit. And I think that the pandemic really kind of showed that, especially in regards to gaming over this past year. Gaming was the only medium that actually grew and became more profitable than other mediums that were affected by the pandemic, because everyone was able to sort of jump in and be able to play. And the beauty of accessibility and inclusion, it just allows us to kind of feel like that we are included too. And essentially as well, like I remember I never really found a character that kind of represented me growing up. I mean, there was one character on TV, Geordie LaForge from Star Trek The Next Generation. I really related to him, but that was kind of the only character I've sort of felt like I connected to, because he was a blind person, but he was also chief engineer of the best ship in the entire Starfleet. But in a game, I never really kind of saw myself as that. And there have been some characters that I've really enjoyed to kind of connect to, and that adds to the escape factor of it. If I can feel like I can be, feel like I can be a character and just feel like, oh, this is this is me, and I feel like I can connect with the story and with the gameplay, because I feel like I'm playing with not sounding crude or anything like that, but you're allowed to play with yourself. Like I can feel like I'm part of the story. It's immersion. I feel like I'm part of what story the developers are trying to tell. And and sometimes, unfortunately, if there's no accessibility in a game, that takes me out of that immersion. That takes me out of that escape, because I'm having to fight with my disability in order to be able to accommodate for what the game is trying to get me to do. But when there is a game that has accessibility and has inclusion and has that representation, then it makes it feel like it takes away the barriers of that disability and allow me to really, really enjoy a story and really enjoy playing a game. Just from simple things like accessibility options or representation in its characters. And that's something that I love. So yeah, gaming for me is, by defining it to me, is entertainment that I can escape to and I can be a part of.
Thanks, Steve. And I'd like to come back to this topic of inclusion in games, because I think the three of us have a very kind of broad, rich definition of games. And I don't think that broad, rich definition of games is necessarily aligned with how the game industry, the triple game industry, conceives of games. But that's another topic that I'd like to come back to in a moment. But before that, I would like to ask this question, which is again part of the basic parameters of inclusion and accessibility in games, which is, what are the basic principles of the practice of designing games and game art inclusively and accessibly? Steve, can I start with you?
Sure.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think with my experience in consulting in the industry, I've kind of consulted with a few pretty large games, such as games from Ubisoft and from Naughty Dog. And generally, what I like to be able to tell them whenever I'm consulting, essentially, there's kind of like three key pillars that'll sort of include not only people with disabilities, but also can open up the dialogue for more inclusivity and representation, in that there's generally three main things. Is that you want to start from the very beginning of the process. You need to have accessibility as part of the design process, because when you start kind of laying down sort of the foundations of what the game is going to be, whether that's the type of gameplay you're going for, the story, whichever, you want to be able to have accessibility, thinking in that you want to have it, okay, we don't want to limit this sort of game to these people that can only handle a specific controller. Like where the gaming sort of you have to sort of use the controls that the game presents you. So, and not everyone can be able to hold on to the standard controller that we've used for a few decades now, where we can hold it in both of our hands and we can be able to reach all the buttons that are on the controller at the same time, and sometimes even push several buttons at the same time. So you have to kind of include multiple different sort of players with different abilities in that design process. And then as you go, you generally would want to be able to have basically also the higher ups in the studio to kind of be on board. You need that's the tricky part, because it's like you design with accessibility in mind. There's going to be a lot of times you're going to try and struggle with trying to be able to get things in, and you're also under a time crunch and everything. So you want to be able to make sure that the higher ups have your back as champions for the game, whether that's having to be able to talk to the money people or executives above them or shareholders, making sure that they have your back when you're trying to be able to add accessibility into your game. And then thirdly is to have accessibility consultants like myself, who generally have the specific disability that you are designing for, because we have that lived in disability. We know what it's like to be able to have that disability day in and day out. So we can be able to provide that proper feedback to help to sort of see how far you've come and whether things need to improve or what sort of feedback that you really get from that. And that's from either just specific consultants like myself that do consult with accessibility, or just players with those disabilities, not just limited to consultants either. So that's generally the three kind of main things that I usually recommend to studios to try to be able to sort of at least create a atmosphere or a culture of making sure that you are applying accessibility across the board. And with that in turn, because you're already thinking of players with multiple different abilities and you're having multiple players being able to play your game, that also opens up to more representation, and that there's definitely more different types of people that are going to be wanting to play this game. And that opens up dialogue to be like, okay, we're serving those with disabilities, but are we serving the BIPOC community? Are we serving the LGBTQIA the community? Like, it just it makes those conversations a little bit easier to just kind of like insert into the design process.
Thanks, Steve. Tiffany, what do you think are the basic principles of the practice of designing games inclusively and accessibly?
I was muted because I was typing very loudly. So everything that Steve said, nail on the head once again. But hiring the right people for these things, bringing in people that understand these disabilities, these the accessibilities for and either inclusion for different aspects. For example, for me, I suffer from epilepsy. Knowing how bright light should be, the flashing, the flickering, and all that stuff, that you don't want to have an issue. There was a video game earlier this year that even with the patch, they still had a really bad flashing light, and it was controversial and all these things. You want to make sure that you don't run into these situations by hiring those people that know about these situations, that organizations that will help you. There's so many organizations that are more than willing to help make games more accessible. Just ask them questions, but a lot of game companies don't do that. But if they would just include those things, games will definitely be more accessible. Games will definitely be fun for everyone. And yeah, that's basically all I can really echo from Steve. But yeah, I would just say, like, hiring the right people that know what they're talking about, that know what, they understand these the needs of the people with accessibility needs. That's what game companies can really do.
So, I think you're both touching on some really important points in this question, and I want to just kind of flesh some of these points out a little bit more, especially with regards to, Tiffany, what you said about this idea of sensibility and working with, for example, the game industry and game companies who can indeed work with community organizations to help to aid them in designing games inclusively and accessibly. So I'm wondering about is, it's kind of a bit more of a philosophical question, in the sense that, inclusion and accessibility and inclusive design is not just a practice, but it's also a philosophy, in the sense of it being an attitude and a certain kind of awareness and mindfulness, and having the resources to tap into in order to implement those inclusive and accessible features. So I'm wondering if we can kind of talk about that a little bit, just in terms of attitudes, attitudinal barriers and biases and assumptions that are held by, for example, the game industry. Can we talk a little bit about that? And I know, Steve, you're experienced in terms of consulting with a lot of these companies, and I'm wondering, from your experience, what can you say about are attitudes changing? Is awareness changing? Or is this something that has to be, that needs more work and improvement?
I think in regards to sort of like I guess the culture around accessibility in studios, that definitely has changed, and is constantly changing. It's definitely within the past few years. It's taken a long time to be able to kind of get to the point where we are now. We still have a very long way to go to be able to affect at least culture within a game development sort of studio to the point where that's like accessibility and representation, inclusivity is part of the culture. I mean, obviously, we're even seeing studios today that are rightfully so being called out for their lack of inclusion and representation and just toxic behavior that can come from working at a studio. And I think the culture is definitely changing. There are definitely some sort of unfortunate stereotypes that are still in play, not only just in the world today, but also in gaming as well. Like I even for my own example, I call myself the blind gamer, and I constantly have to like if you read any of my comments or go into my chat, essentially I'm constantly having to be able to prove, quote unquote, that I am not faking my blindness, and that how can I be able to play video games if I'm blind? Because there's still that stereotype that if you say you're blind, then you have completely like no vision whatsoever. And there is that stereotype that's been kind of perpetuated by the media for the past several, like for a long time. And that's like the fact that that's still around. Like that's honestly, it's very like not true. There has like I think there was I remember seeing, at least in Canada, there was the CNIB, the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, had released a study, or at least I remember a series of ads where they had shown that 9 out of 10 people who say they are blind have at least some vision. And generally, the way I'm able to best describe at least my own blindness is that blindness is a spectrum. It's not an on-off switch. And it depends on kind of like where you fall into that spectrum. You can still consider yourself blind. And until we kind of get to that point where just all disabilities is on that spectrum, then that's when change and progress can be able to come. And I think right now that is starting to change in the industry. There are still some things that are in studios and developers that feel like, oh, I'll just add this setting and as a turn on, like a turn on or off, and there we go, accessibility is fixed. It's like that's not really the case, because you need to have. There's a lot more involved in that, and you're only hitting a certain specific players with that will, like, yes, that feature will benefit if you're able to turn it on or off, but it doesn't really fix the thing that you are trying to build a design for and for disabled players. So I think that's kind of the until we get to the point in development culture and the philosophy of it is that when people realize that disability is a spectrum, that's when I think we can be able to like fully like really start to kind of change a lot of the culture around disabilities in not only just gaming but just in life in general.
Thank you, Steve. Tiffany, what do you think? I'm just wondering about the culture. Steve brought a really good point to the forefront, which is the culture of the development culture.
Yes.
And how can we shift those attitudes about including accessibility?
Yeah, we're in a time right now where a lot of things are changing in gaming culture. There's whether it being controversy or people having more inclusion. The culture, yes, it does need a shift. A major shift.
Yes.
Especially in the accessibility aspect. There are game companies that just don't care. And unfortunately, the more and more these game companies, I guess in the sense, the more and more we complain. I want to say complain as the nicest way to saying it. The more and more we complain, I think the more and more they may listen to it. But yes, there needs to be a change currently in the gaming culture for the sake of the future of accessibility, because people don't understand that I may be able to play a Dark Souls game, but that doesn't mean my friend won't be able to play a Dark Souls game. And there's a lot of this it's like one of the biggest like balls of controversy. Well, why can't they make it a little bit accessible? And there has to be a change. There has to be a change, whether it being accessibility, inclusion, gender. It just, there has to be a change. And yeah, Steve, like I said, once again, Steve nailed it on the head. But like for me, I feel that until that people see these issues or people understand these issues, it won't be a shift. But now, like I said, due to something big that recently happened, we are getting a change. And maybe it'll be the catalyst that pushes forward for future change in gaming companies. So I don't want to say anything, but yeah, it's a big thing that's happened recently. But yeah, hopefully that'll be the catalyst for future change.
Yep, hopefully.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. Okay, I'm going to jump into the next section quickly, even though I had a few questions about, it's interesting how, and I just want to mention this, the Accessibility of Ontarians with Disabilities Act, that is the AODA of Ontario. Well, the objective of AODA is to be accessible by 2025 in all spheres of life, including built environments, transportation, employment, and information and communications, which is where the games fall. By removing and preventing barriers so that people with disabilities can participate more fully in communities, will the game industry and digital games meet this standard? What are the barriers to meeting the standard? What are the barriers to meeting the standard? Obviously, I don't think they're going to be met by 2025 because it's only a few years.
I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, I was about to say.
I'm so glad you said that before I did.
What do we think about this, Steve? What are your thoughts on this?
When it comes to standards and sort of like, I guess, requirements or policies or like essentially that require games to or studios to adhere to specific standards in accessibility, I find that can be kind of a mixed bag. I generally, whenever I get asked, like, when can we be able to have what are the standard accessibility options that should be in every game? And I'm like, well, you kind of have to sort of it really depends on the game. And as an example, if you have a game that doesn't really have any spoken dialogue, but it has sort of the text on the screen, you don't really need the options for subtitles specifically, because you already have there's certain games that sort of will need certain options for sure, and then there are games that may not need them. And also as well, I'm very leery about trying to be able to suggest, okay, these are the standards that need to be able to meet for every single game, and basically developers treating it like a checklist, because whenever you have it set up as a checklist, then people will developers may just sort of, okay, checked off, good, we're done, move on, and that's it. But when you have what we really want is studios to have and developers to have the freedom to, okay, here's what would be great to have in this game. What can we be able to do to innovate? And that's the problem I fear about when it comes to sort of standardized checklists of you have to meet this requirement for accessibility, is that because you don't you may stifle innovation because all you're doing is just checking off a checkbox, saying, okay, great, we got deaf and hard of hearing accessibility done, great, we got blind accessibility done, moving on. And it really and you're not sort of trying to be able to move accessibility forward. And and that's the fear I have, is that, okay, yeah, great. Of course, I would love to be able to have all games be created by 2025 to have accessibility options in them. And yes, there are definitely some that I feel are just sort of universal, like text size, or be able to scale UI, or subtitles if needed, or the ability to be able to remap controls. But those are things I think that are definitely would be universal. But every game is different. Every game like it doesn't require all the same things. So when you have that, like when you're kind of rushed to kind of do that into a game, that's when it becomes difficult. I don't know what the solution would be in that sense. I've heard people suggest possibly like, okay, the ESRB ratings, which is the sort of the ratings for content in games, where there's like if you see any ads that say E for everyone or T for teen or M for mature, that's basically like how the MPAA rating is sort of similar for movies, same thing for video games. And a lot of people suggested, well, what if we just have accessibility as part of that certification? And that, again, I just think that like that's great, but I worry about people just sort of using that requirement as like, okay, this is the maximum as what we'll reach, instead of treating it as like the minimum of what we can do.
Excellent answer, Steve. That's quite a thoughtful answer in terms of just the sort of the breadth and the depth of what's required when thinking inclusively and accessibly. Tiffany, what say you?
Yeah, we're not going to get into Toy Story 5. It's not happening. It's Steve, with the checklist system. Yeah, I don't want gaming to be a checklist. I want something to be like instantaneously, like it should be like a, what's the term I want to use? Like found like an instant foundation, not like a checklist. Be like, yeah, okay, this is what we're gonna do with the game. We're gonna make a game about a cat. Okay, but the cat is, we're gonna do accessibility stuff. Yeah, already automatically done in there. No check place. Thinking about everyone, having everything done. Perfect, beautiful. I like the idea of the ESRB thing. I think that could be something if worked right. I think that could be something if it worked right. Or like I'm trying to fight on Twitch, a warning system. For example, epilepsy warnings, flashing lights, things to warn people that this stuff is in games that can actually help those who have sensitivity to lights and things like that. Some options to turn these off, just so many possibilities. But we're not there yet, unfortunately. And we won't be there for probably a decade. And that's the downside about all of this. It's unnerving. Like you can see my hands. It's really unnerving because like we're in 2021. We've had video games for over 3 decades. Wait, how old was video games?
I think we're up to 40 now, I think, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think
80s, yeah.
80s, yep. 80s, yep. 40
Fun.
years. 40 years. And we still are not quite there. It's like we have companies that are like, okay, yeah, our game's accessible. Wait, we have to go back and patch and add things to it. That should not happen.
Mm-hmm.
It should not happen. It should be something that right off the bat, let's go. We have it. We know what we're doing. We talk to the right people. We don't have to do this, that, and the other. And I sound frustrated because because as a person who suffers from multiple things, it is not fun. It's not fun. It's not whatsoever. There should be subtitles automatically big enough for everyone to see. There should be hearing for everyone to see. It should be things to warn people if something big is coming, like flashing lights. We have this technology, we're not using it. And yes, I fully agree with Steve. There should not be a checklist. We are not checklists. We are not. We are people that just want a game just as much as everyone else, period. And that's my take.
This is great. And I'm going to add, Tiffany, I will add to your point that in terms of, we've had 3 decades of gaming and games or whatnot. And actually, when we think of accessibility as a philosophy and a design practice and a movement, the accessibility movement has been around since the 1960s. It emerged in conjunction with the civil rights movement in the States and in America and North America. And that's really about 60 years that we've had accessibility on the map in terms of built environments and other spheres of life. That's a long time. to be advocating for accessibility.
Very
I
long
think.
time.
I'm wondering if we can shift a little bit now to just more specific, addressing more specific and a particular kind of games or platforms. So I want to shift the conversation to AAA games, because I know you both are kind of gold mines. Steve, you are also a gold mine of information. And, the question is, what are there any specific examples of AAA games which are both accessible and inaccessible that we can learn from? And what are those lessons?
Right? How long is this panel?
Oh man, how long are we gonna be on here? Oh boy, oh boy.
You know what? Maybe just pick one game that's either accessible or inaccessible, and what are some insights that you have gleaned from that particular game? Just one game.
Ooh, okay. Being able to narrow down to one. I would say, okay. So, I mean, Tiffany, I'll be the one to say it. Probably the most accessible game that we currently have at the moment is something that I'm very proud and honored to have been a part of. Is The Last of Us Part 2, which is made by Naughty Dog for Sony's PlayStation consoles. It's a sequel to a game that was created in 2013 and became essentially what people have declared it as sort of the game of a generation. It was the game that sort of stood out amongst the rest, and so the sequel was highly anticipated. And I was honored to be a part of that by being one of the amazing consultants that worked with Naughty Dog to be able to provide feedback for that game. And it covers so many different options. And has so many different overlapping systems that are able to work together to be able to make that game as accessible as possible. There are over 60 plus accessibility options that are in this game, and there are very rare games that I can be able to say that kind of every sort of disabled player should be able to play, and that is one of them. The fact that even for myself on the blind side, this game is fully playable for majority of the blindness spectrum, from being completely sightless to even just have a little bit of astigmatism. There are options there that will make this game as accessible, and not only just being able to play it, but being able to complete the game and complete the story, which is something that is also very rare in gaming. So that's one that I would definitely recommend as kind of like the game, but the game currently right now, I would say probably the game that it's hard to kind of cut for me. I don't like to sort of talk about the negative sort of like games that just don't have accessibility in mind, and I'm not knocking the developers for not including accessibility as part of the design process, but I do want to call at least a little bit. There is basically the Souls games coming from Software. So that's games like Demon Souls, Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, Dark Souls, and Bloodborne. They are, and it's been a topic of conversation for the past several years, where it just constantly will always come up when it comes to the fact that those games are extremely difficult, and there is no difficulty options that are available in that. It's set at a very high difficulty, and you can't change that. And it's not to say that no one wants a challenge when they're playing games. Even disabled players want a challenge when they're playing games. But and then there's been talk about, okay, well, what if we add, like, say, an easy mode into the game? And this is a whole other topic conversation. This is like, believe me, I can go very, very nerdy on how to be able to on these games and why they're inaccessible. But I'll just basically TLDR of it is too long didn't read of it is this. Essentially adding those, like an easy mode, will essentially is kind of like adding forcing a crowbar of accessibility into the game. You kind of have to design the game with accessibility in mind, in order to be able to make it so that it's still difficult and there's still a challenge for players. But the players can be able to adjust their experience how they want. And the fact that if there's options there that can help a player, and it's optional, which is something that some people will think that we're trying to force accessibility into those games, and we're not. We want the option. It doesn't affect anyone else's playthrough if they don't want to use it. It's an option. And so I would say right now, those are the ones that constantly comes up. I think probably, Tiffany, you would agree that we've seen this topic of conversation many times over the past several years.
The DMs.
Oh yeah. Oh, believe me, I've gone through a lot. It's but it those are currently the games that are generally not fully accessible or have accessibility as part of the design process that I would love to be able to see change, because I would love to be able to play these games. I just can't. Those are my game with great accessibility and game that does not have great accessibility.
Tiff, it's an amazing answer, Steve. And I like the fact that you called out the offenders, the Dark Souls series.
Unfortunately.
Tiffany, can you very quickly, we're kind of running out of time.
Oh yeah. For me, surprisingly an accessible game for me, just from my perspective, was Hades. It is a very hard game, but they included something called a God mode. So every time you die, you get like an extra buff. Instead of like the difficulty doesn't change, but you get a buff to make you a wee bit stronger, and you keep going through the game, and you just keep going and going, dying. And that was fantastic. I was gonna say Assassin's Creed Valhalla, but I'll give it way too much. That has just a shit ton of accessibility. Sorry, I swear. Yep. Has a crap ton of accessibility. But
Ubisoft does a great job.
Just let them go. But Hades, for me, because I want to play harder games. I do like playing Dark Souls. I love Monster Hunter, blah, blah, blah. But when I played Hades, that God mode saved my life and actually let me still enjoy the experience, because I was able to just keep dying and be like, okay, I'm stronger now. Let's go. Kind of a situation. Non-accessible game. And I hate to say this. And I said this on Twitter, so Steve knows what may be coming. Resident Evil Village. Oh. I love the game. I love the story, but my friends cannot play it because it wasn't the visual, the I love Capcom. Trust me, I'm a Capcom fangirl till the day I die. But the visuals were, when it comes to the subtitles, it was bad. When it comes to the graphics of the visuals, everything was dark. You could not, I mean, even if you lighten it, it was still not great, And it breaks my heart, because Resident Evil 6 is more accessible than Resident Evil Village, and that's saying a lot, and that game is horrible. So for me, it's those two games. It's like a different dynamic. For a game I really, really love, for a game I didn't expect that I would love, those two games that, it's most accessible and not most accessible to me, at least.
Thanks, Tiffany. Steve, can I quickly ask you this question, because I actually tweeted this and I thought it was such a great point. You said, and this is with regards to indie games and art games, which I was hoping to cover a little bit more, but we don't have the time. But I think this is a wonderful point. You said on Twitter, it's a two-person team. There's no way they have the time and resources to make the game accessible. So you were talking about small teams, right, of designers. That's the assumption. It's a two-person team, and there's no time or money. How can independent and low-budget game developers make their games inclusive and accessible, given limited resources such as time and money?
Sure. Yeah, I'll try to be quick. Yeah, the context of that was the two-person team I was talking about was for a game that just recently came out for Xbox called Death's Door, and it's a really great game. I would definitely recommend checking it out, but it also lacks in regards to a lot of accessibility basics, unfortunately. And what I meant by that statement, where it's like, yes, it's a two-person team, and some people will say, well, they may not have had the time and the resources resources to add accessibility into their game. And to be honest, that's not true. It's difficult, but it's not impossible. The beauty of being an independent studio or independent developer is that you can there are resources that are available. There's, if you look for video game accessibility guidelines, there's a website for that covers both basic, intermediate, and advanced, at least basics for accessibility. And then there's also Xbox has their own accessibility guidelines that they have internally for their studios, but they have available to the public. So there are resources to learn what accessibility to add into the game. But what's great is that they have the ability to be able to experiment and be a bit more faster and efficient when it comes to trying out new things and trying out different accessibility options, because they're not bogged down by the studio sort of culture of like, you have to get it approved by a manager or a producer, or has to go through some red tape and it takes several times and a long time to be able to kind of get stuff approved. Like you're allowed to be a little bit more nimble and try things out. And if it doesn't work, try a different way and try again. And you're able to be that more efficient. So in a way, a lot of people think, oh, you just may not have the time and resources, but in reality, you do. You just have to sort of be dedicated. You have to be dedicated to wanting to be able to have games accessible. And there are a lot of games from really small teams that have been award winners when it comes to not only just the game itself, but also for accessibility. So it's difficult. But it's not impossible. You just need to know where to look and do a bit of research and how to be able to add these accessibility options into the game that you want to be able to create. Whether you're a 1-person team or 100 or 1,000 person team, accessibility is available to everyone. You just have to want to be able to do it.
Great answer, Steve. And I think you're touching upon this idea that it's an attitude. It's a really a kind of orientation and a philosophy and an attitude of awareness to engage deeply with your audience in a meaningful way with your players and your audiences, and include players from all kinds of diverse abilities and differences, and be able to account for those differences in a meaningful fashion. So I'm wondering, there's so many. Also, I have so many questions about art games, and who knows, maybe we'll get asked a question. I wanted to ask both of you actually if you've ever played any so-called art games, interactive fiction or graphic novels, or kind of not sort of unconventional game genres. And if you think, for example, what are some of the unique accessibility challenges facing art games and artist-driven experiences? I don't know if you have anything to say about that. Or maybe to turn that question around, how are art games uniquely positioned to challenge gaming conventions, assumptions, biases, and barriers enacted by more conventional games? I don't know if you have anything to say about that.
I feel, art games are amazing. A story-driven, I think they call them walking games or walking simulators. Those are games I actually do not mind playing. For instance, Phoenix Wright just came out with a mode where you don't even have to play the game. You can just turn it off and it progresses through the story. So it makes it a story game. Basically, I think that's wonderful. I love walking. I love walking simulators. I do. I love just walking and hearing what this character is going through and learning more about the story. There's a game called Gone Home, and it's a fantastic walking simulator, as they like to call it. And it just it's beautiful. And it's one of those artistic, unconventional games that there's no enemies, there's no this, there's no major puzzle solving. It's just a story about a girl coming home and figuring out what is going on. And the ending is beautiful. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. And I think that's a great example of an artsy like game. It's a walking simulator. But yeah, that's like, and it's just great. That's one example I would like to give, and I think there should be more of those, especially if they for the accessibility crowd. Because you can add subtitles, you can add this and that. That way, everyone can be involved and can still enjoy a fantastic story.
Those are some great examples, Tiffany. Steve, what do you think about this question about art games and how are they uniquely positioned to challenge, more conventional games and and assumptions about what constitutes a game? Mm-hmm. This idea that the game, in the popular imagination, that a game is a kind of reward-centric, combat-centric experience, mm-hmm. a first-person shooter. These are kind of popular assumptions about games. So I'm wondering about how these types of very artistically minded, narrative-driven, experimental, creative games can challenge some of those assumptions and then encompass a wider audience.
Yeah, and this actually kind of comes back to what we were mentioning earlier in regards to some of the conversations we've had online in regards to some very inaccessible games. In the common trope, or at least the common answer or statement that we usually get told to us is that we when it comes to games, we should respect the artist's vision when it comes to creating those games and those experiences. And when the way I've seen a lot of developers kind of combat against that is that yes, art is in the eye of the person that's consuming that art. And the developers shouldn't necessarily try to be able to imply a certain thing as part of their art, because they want the player to be able to interpret with their own version of what that story or what that sort of gameplay experience or that experience that they want the player to be able to incorporate. And I think adding accessibility just means that, but it just means that art can be consumed by more people. And I like Tiffany said, she said it exactly. I love those kind of games. Those just where it's story based, or it's just you can kind of tune in, and there's also this push of these games that are just tune in and sort of it just sort of zen out and kind of just enjoy the experience. There's games such as Journey, or a wonderful little indie game called Soul, where you're literally this little ball of light. That's Soul, SOLE, where your little ball of light, where you're just kind of in a dark world and you are just spreading light throughout the entire world, and you're kind of covering the world with just making it bright, and things grow and as everything that the light touches. And there's no enemies. There's a bit of puzzle sort of solving involved in that, but and you get to learn more about the world and that you're in. But that's really all that there is. And I would even say technically there's a game that I absolutely love that is such a zen and satisfying experience. It may seem silly to say, but there's a game called Power Wash Simulator.
Oh, yes, fantastic game.
It's if you've ever had to be able to power wash a house or power wash a car, you know how satisfying it is to be able to clean and just swing your the power washer just back and forth and just clean it back and just make scrubbing the thing. It just, I don't know, it's such a zen-like experience. And there's a game that you can be able to play called Power Wash Simulator where it gives you that feeling. Mm-hmm. And I got lost in just 4 hours. Before I even realized how long I've been playing for 4 hours of literally just scrubbing and power washing several different things, from a backyard to a car to a motorcycle to even the Mars rover. That's you can clean that too. And it's just such a cool, and it's the most satisfying and zen-like experience. And to me, I feel that's art. Yeah, it's silly in a way. It's really on the surface, Power Wash Simulator. Really? That's the thing that you want to be able to play. But to me, I'm heck yeah, because it's such an enjoyable experience that you can just sort of tune in, turn your brain off to a certain degree, and just enjoy the experience that's being laid out for you. And whether that's in a simulator or in an artful game like Soul or like Journey or any of the other sort of walking simulators type games, 100%. It's just that, like, and if accessibility can be a part of that and make those those experiences accessible, it just means that more players can be able to enjoy the same art that the artist in our case, the developers, wanted to be able to create.
Thanks, Steve. Tiffany, can I ask a very specific question about streaming? Because you're the expert, you are the live streamer. What are some ways streaming companies can improve accessibility with streaming?
A lot.
Mm-hmm.
Better closed captions. That's a big one. A colorblind mode to help people. That's another one. Accessibility warning tags. That's something I've been complaining to Twitch about 2 years now. Just a lot. There's a lot companies can do. They're still not doing the littlest things. They're not doing. Like I said, the closed caption is nice, but there's a lot of improvement that needs to be made upon it. And that's one thing that just bugs me, and as an accessibility advocate. And for me, not everyone knows what's in a game. Not everyone knows what's going to be happening. So I personally make accessibility warning tags if I know there's going to be flashing lights. Accessibility, epilepsy warning if I know there's going to be gore. There's a blood warning. There's different things that I implement myself as a streamer to not only protect myself, but my community, that streaming companies need to actually step up and do better. Colorblind mode is one. We have a lot of streamers that are colorblind modes. We have a lot of people in the community that are colorblind. It's just a lot. It's the little things that they can do, especially with the amount of money these companies who owns these companies. It's one of those things where they really need to step up. And I know they're working on it. We just had Twitch's Global Accessibility Awareness Day. That was great. We had a lot of amazing disabled and accessibility advocates talking on Twitch, but it was just for a day.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Tiff. Thanks,
You're
Tiffany.
welcome.
So I will now turn it over to Megan. Megan, I think we have Q&A waiting for us.
Hey, sure thing. So we have a question coming in from the chat from Colin. So many of the great accessible games are single player experiences. And they're curious to hear about any ideas on collaborative and multiplayer games and how those could be more inclusive for players with different needs and experience levels who are all playing together.
Oh,
great question.
I play a lot of I hate to say this game, but I play a lot of Apex Legends, and I play Overwatch, and Overwatch's accessibility is actually not bad. They have a mode where there's a subtitles saying what all the characters are doing. They have what they're doing, the abilities they're doing, what they're saying, and I was actually taken back by that. They have a colorblind mode. They have you can change your controls. They actually don't have a bad accessibility mode. Apex Legends is the same way. That is another multiplayer game that actually wants to do more in accessibility. They want to improve more in accessibility. They've said this. I'm going to hold them to it. Dead by Daylight. I complained a lot about a character named the Doctor. He was a flashy character. And they are improving their accessibility. They added a colorblind mode finally. It's a game that doesn't really require subtitles in a sense, but they do need to work on the hearing aspect of it, because there are deaf gamers that play this game. But they have improved on the colorblind mode. They added so that you're not, for people with hand issues, you're not constantly clicking for that little struggle phase. It's like literally a one button prompt now with that game. So with multiplayer games, it's a little more difficult, but they are trying. There are companies that are trying their best for that even playing field for everyone to have that accessibility. Is it perfect? No. Does it need help? Hell yes, but they are trying.
Great. Steve, any additions to that?
Not much really. I mean, I can offer other types of games that are possibilities, but essentially, yeah, multiplayer and accessibility is definitely something that I'm very interested to see how developers can be able to tackle accessibility, because when you have games like Call of Duty Warzone, for example, people's like there's definitely a section of players that would consider something like an auto aim a cheat in the game, because essentially it's sort of like aims, like it snaps to an enemy that's off in the distance, and that is actually in certain cases there you can install mods to be able to do that, and that's kind of considered cheating, quote unquote. But in reality, auto aim and target snapping and auto targeting is something that myself and other people in the disability community use all the time. That is part of accessibility. So being able to add those in without sort of seeming like that that they're put at sort of a major, like a more an advantage on a competitive level. If you're just playing kind of like casually, then any sort of option can help. And yeah, Apex Legends and Overwatch is very, very good for that. But for other games, it's kind of trying to find that sort of balance of a casual sort of, hey, I just want to jump in with some friends and play this game, or just sort of jumping in from a competitive level. There's definitely possibilities for both when it comes to accessibility. We're just kind of not there yet, and I'm very interested to see within the next few years as to where accessibility in those kind of multiplayer games can grow. There are some that have them now, and as Tiffany mentioned, Apex and Overwatch are definitely two of the best ones right now, but they still also have a kind of a long way to go to make it truly an accessible multiplayer experience.
Thanks, Steve. These are great points you're both raising. I'm curious. I have another question. Is there, for both of you actually, can we examine, or is there a specific feature in games, for example, such as user interface or visual graphics or player controls or gaming accessories when it comes to controllers and headsets, or is there a specific feature that where developers are advancing accessibility or inclusion? You see what I'm trying to get at? In other words, is there a specific realm of gaming where there's more accessibility being developed as opposed to other features? And can you both comment on this in terms of just the broad landscape of games out there? And what areas, for example, need more development in terms of accessibility? What features
difficulty
are often overlooked?
Yeah.
Difficulty. Some companies are actually stepping up for that, though. Psychonauts 2, that's coming out. They're actually making a no die feature, which means that no matter how much you want to, somehow you just are, how much you're struggling with the game, you cannot die. And like I said, Phoenix Wright is making it so that you don't have to actually do anything in the game. You just go through the story and you just enjoy the story if you just want to enjoy the story. But difficulty is one of the things that it's still not there. Souls. But when it comes down to that, there are companies that are really stepping up to that and making it so that everyone can play this game and enjoy the story. And that's wonderful. It still has, like I said, it has a long way to go. There are still some companies that don't understand or just don't want to do it, but it's their property. I can't tell them to change their game. It's their love, it's their vision, whatever. But do I think they should? Yes. I think they should make an easier mode so everyone can enjoy the game. But that's just, difficulty is one of the main things that
Yeah.
Steve, why do you think that is? Because I think you have a lot of insight on that front, because you were going to go into this topic and I said I'm going to refrain myself from going off this topic. Why is it that game companies are reluctant to open up the gaming experience in terms of difficulty and similar features?
I mean, I can't sort of speak for what goes on in a developer or studio's minds, because there's a lot of cases I'm not there or in those rooms. Oh, but to be a fly on the wall of those sort of meetings, I would say the tricky part about it is like it could be several different things. Either there's not a lot of disabled people that are on staff as a developer that can be able to sort of talk to that kind of experience, and also it's like I never want to say that a developer, unless there's evidence of this, I never want to say a developer is excluding adding accessibility or even like difficulty options into a game on purpose. I never I never want to say that, because I don't know. However, I generally will say that they are probably ignorant, and they just don't know or not exposed to either in their personal life or someone that works at the studio. They just may not know what accessibility is and what it can and what it can do, and they just sort of design their games just how they normally would design it and how their friends normally would design it. But if you don't have those people around in your life that can be able to sort of give you that different perspective, that's hard. That's hard to kind of get unless you sort of seek that information out. And when it comes to sort of adding difficulty options in games, I see the where players are coming from when it comes to adding difficulty options into a game can be seen as, oh, you're just watering down the game, or you're watering down the experience. And I understand that aspect of it. That's why I never want to say just adding an easy mode into those games will fix all problems, because they don't. You have to include accessibility as part of the design process, and part of that design process is choosing what type of difficulty or what kind of challenge they want to give the player. There is definitely room for those kind of very challenging games to have a great accessibility. Whether it takes just a little bit of effort, a little bit of time, and a little bit of executives that are on that level, basically, let's push for it. The less that happens in a studio, then it's a very uphill battle, and would be very difficult to be able to kind of include that. And as the conversation of accessibility happens and it gets louder and there's more voices in this space, then it just means that that our voices will be very tough to ignore, or to be ignorant about. And I think that there are a lot of resources that are available now that are very easy to be able to find. It's like, I don't want to say just to anyone, just do a Google search, but essentially there are resources that are available by doing a Google search, being like, oh, you know what? Okay, what type of experiences would these type of players have? And all it takes is just one small thing. I never want to say to someone like a From Software that develops like a Demon Souls type game that they need to make their next game to be completely accessible, like The Last of Us Part 2. I generally would like to be able to at least say, start small and build up as you continue on in future projects, because then as you go, the more tools and resources you already have internally and things that you've learned from building those options or those features in previous projects can be able to be translated into your next project. So that's what happened with Ubisoft. Ubisoft had that particular problem where they didn't have a lot of options in games. Case in point, Assassin's Creed, the very first game in that franchise. It's a huge franchise, one of the biggest selling franchises that Ubisoft had. Not a lot of people know that the very first game didn't have subtitles whatsoever.
It sure didn't.
Yeah, exactly. But now when you look at, say, like the latest iteration, which is Assassin's Creed Valhalla, not only are subtitles a part of the game, it's basically on by default. And that's just one tiny example of an accessibility option that has grown with the franchise and grown with the company. All it took was just a few people to basically hey, let's see what we can be able to do. And it just, now Ubisoft is actually one of those studios that I trust like 100% that at least that they are trying to be able to create policies and procedures in place to be able to create accessibility as part of every single project that they release. And I have absolute faith that whatever game comes out from Ubisoft, I know that there's going to be a very decent amount of accessibility options in there because of all of those small beginnings. And that's what I say for something the difficulty. That's like all it takes is just one small thing to be able to allow that little small seed to grow within that studio or within any other studio for that matter.
Thank you, Steve. Great points there. Just really great insights coming from you about, the sort of the nuances of the issue of accessibility when it comes to difficulty modes and easy modes and so forth. It's not just kind of a binary yes, no answer. It's much more complicated. It's much more meaningful. And it requires a certain kind of a shift in rethinking our assumptions about inclusion and accessibility. That's not always easy to have to learn or to acquire those sensibilities, because I think it's sometimes does stem from the inability to realize that you need a diverse crew, a diverse team of people to be able to assess and evaluate those issues in a game and be able to rectify those kind of the lack of access and a lack of participation that a game might be engendering for players. So I'm wondering if we can just kind of end on what is the future of accessible gaming, in your opinion, in both of your opinions? Where are we heading? What would you like to see happen in the next 5 years? Tiffany.
I want to see more inclusion. I want to see more, like I said, I don't want it to be a checklist, like Steve said. I want it to be a foundation. I want it to be built. I just want to see more inclusion in the industry, period. Whether it be accessibility advocates or consultants or whatever, women, people of color, so on and so on. I just want more inclusion so that we can all enjoy games how games are supposed to be, which is for everyone. Are we there yet? No. Are we? We're about to get there, possibly. So that's all I really want to see. I want to see more accessibility. I want to see less. I want to see my friends be able to play the same games that I can play. I want to be able to play games with my friends that may stop me from playing games. I want all of this. And like I said, it's going to take time. I would say in a decade we'll probably be there. But when he said 2025, no, sorry, Bob, we are not going to be there in 2025. But we are definitely, I believe in a decade, we'll probably be what we need to be.
Thanks, Tiffany. And, I just want to point out, you've just singled out this incredible quote from me in particular, which I think encompasses inclusive design and accessibility. And it is this, which both of you have kind of constructed together in this conversation, and it defines this conversation, which is this. Tiffany, you said, I don't want it to be a checklist. I want it to be a foundation. I think that's quite profound. I'm
going to quote that and sell that. So please, no one take that, please. That's mine.
Tiffany, yeah.
That's mine. That's my trademark from now on.
Steve, could you add on this front? What's the future of gaming?
Yeah, so I've been asked this a lot in regards to at least over the past year when it came to sort of when The Last of Us 2 came out, where it just was such a huge moment for accessibility in gaming. And I've kind of I've sort of been able to describe this moment in accessibility, because everyone kind of sees that as sort of the ultimate pinnacle for accessibility. And I generally like to say, yes, that is a very strong moment, and we're going to be thinking about accessibility before The Last of Us Part 2, and then accessibility after The Last of Us Part 2. But I love, I can't remember who specifically said this quote, but I love it, and I kind of use it all the time. The Last of Us was not the end of the accessibility journey. It was the end of the beginning. It just means that now accessibility is kind of part of the culture now. It's still got a long way to go, but it's like people are aware of accessibility now. The people I've been able to talk to and interact with in this industry, I've had the honor to basically to talk to people as high as as Phil Spencer, from the head of Xbox, to Reggie Fils-Aimé, former president of Nintendo, and they are all very much on board for accessibility. They want to be able to see more accessible games. And with The Last of Us 2, we have yet to see the impact of what that is going to be. That game is going to do for the industry. It would be. I'm very curious to see what that impact would be 5-10 years from now, because there are games that are going to be inspired by what the Naughty Dog and Sony was able to do with that game, to be able to make more accessible experiences. And same with Ubisoft, and same with Xbox, and same with so many other studios that are now inspired to be able to make their games as accessible to everyone. And again, I'll go back to that same quote of, when everybody plays, we all win. When everybody has the ability to be able to play a game with equal access and equal representation and equal togetherness when it comes to playing a game, we all win. And we all are able to, we're all able to play games, and that just makes that, that's the future I want to see in games, is that we can all play together and we can all win.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Steve. And we've got just a few more minutes left, 3 minutes left, and I just want to quickly ask both of you, and I'll start with Tiffany. What are some projects that you are working on at the moment or in the future that are really meaningful to you in this regard, in terms of accessibility and inclusion?
Right now, I'm just fighting against Twitch and trying to get notice to them to hopefully give us accessibility warning tags. I've been petitioning this small little link, having people upvote it so that Twitch can notice it, so that we can have accessibility warning tags, not just to protect the streamers, but to protect, not just protect streamers, but to protect our community as well. That's my personal project that I've been taking on. And of course, doing my charity streams and for different causes for accessibility or diseases or chronic illnesses.
Thank you, Tiffany. Steve, over to you. Any special projects?
I wish I could say all the projects I'm working on. Unfortunately, just I'm under a lot of NDAs of things, but there are definitely some that I'm working on that I'm very excited for people to be able to see and consume at a certain point. I'd say the stuff I can talk about essentially is that I'm constantly sort of like Tiffany, kind of in that content creator space, like just providing more awareness and talking about accessibility on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/snowball, or on Twitch as well. And it just basically just kind of educate as best as possible for more accessibility. Again, we have a long way to go, and I join Tiffany in that sort of fight as well, to try to be able to make streaming as accessible as possible. And because I think that's where I feel like the future of consuming video games is literally the ability to be able to kind of join in and be a part of a community when it comes to people playing video games. So the more accessible that can be, then the better the market, or the better the sort of the gaming industry and the gaming sort of population can be. So yeah, that's kind of it.
Thank you both for engaging in this incredibly rich and wonderful conversation about inclusion and accessibility in games. I really, really appreciate it. It's just an honor and a pleasure to hear your insights, Tiffany and Steve, both of you. And over to you, Megan. Are we wrapping up?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you, Steve, for sharing all of your experience and expertise. And thank you, Sandra, as well, for leading this really, really rich discussion. I'd also like to take a moment to thank our ASL interpreters, Shelby and Debbie, for their assistance with this event. Thank you both so much. I'd like to also express appreciation to our partners for the event, particularly Len and Amanda at Hand-Eye Society and Colin at the Inclusive Design Research Center at OCAD University. Thank you so much. And also, this event would not be possible without the support of our funders, the Government of Canada, the Canada Council for the Arts, the Ontario Arts Council, and the Toronto Arts Council. And thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us this evening. If you would like to see more events like this one, I encourage you to check out Vector Festival. We have events running until August 8th, so you can check out our website, 2021.vectorfestival.org. And yeah, thank you all so much.